Pat Campbell is going to get us rolling here for part one this morning.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Again, we're excited to have you all on the line with us, and we look forward to many more conversations and helping all of us through this process with all of our new grantees. I'm kind of gonna skip a little forward here. We're gonna go through several things on the agenda. There are three parts that we're going to be going through today. Part one will be apprenticeship program updates. I'm going to kind of do that. Highlighted grant requirements is part two, and quarterly report requirements. The highlighted is that's what you're going to do. Correct?
Right. I'll do part two.
And then part three is going to be Gary Eichen. He's going to go through the quarterly report requirements with all of you. So I don't want to take too much time because part two and part three are the real important parts of this, but we just wanted to recap on our previous meeting. My section, I'm going to go through the follow-up from the kickoff meeting, project work plans, outreach success stories, and other issues and concerns. So as it relates to the follow-up on the kickoff meeting, it was really awesome to see all of you, to get all of your feedback, and to really hear about all of your projects. The feedback we had in the surveys, everyone really appreciated hearing the other projects and what they were. We got a really high satisfaction rate on most of the questions. You know, with the brainstorming activities, we were a little shy on the facilitation because we really were trying not to be too prescriptive to the grantees. I think we recognize that you guys are looking for a little bit more framework on these and a little clearer strategy on the deliverables for the brainstorming activities, which we will try and incorporate in each of our in-person meetings. I think moving forward, though, we'll look for some challenges and some things that you really would like to brainstorm about. And so that feedback, if you'll send to Gary Eichen, then we'll get those and we'll come up with some brainstorming activities and get that the strategy on how to address that lined up so that it's a little clearer for everyone. We also wanted to remind everyone about the Apprenticeship 101 workshop to contact, and this is on page 4 of your agenda or of your PowerPoint, to contact Alexandra Diaz for information on locations and how to sign up. And then there is a link there, or her email address is listed there that you can reach out to her. If you're having difficulty with that, please let Gary know and he'll let us know as well. Then the quarterly meetings. We are making these on the same date as the iWeb Apprenticeship Committee meetings so that you're able to attend those meetings. I understand from Jennifer that we already have something out there that has the iWeb Apprenticeship Committee meeting times, and those are on the dates, but our meetings, our in-person meetings, will be on March 21st from 1 to 3, and that would mean that the Apprenticeship Committee meeting is in the morning. And then on June 19th, we're meeting from 9:30 to 11:30, and that would mean that the Apprenticeship Committee meeting is in the afternoon. So on September 19th, our meeting is from 1 to 3, so that would mean in the morning for the apprenticeship, and so on and so forth. These are the monthly, or these are the quarterly in-person meetings, and these where we'll be doing the brainstorming activities, etc. The monthly conference calls will be every third Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m., except on the months of the quarterly meetings. So in March, June, September, and December, we won't have our call from 2 to 3. We look for concerns, some technical assistance concerns, please submit those to Gary, and that will help line up what we want to address in those calls. And we also want to make sure that if there's something that is posing an urgent issue or a frequently asked questions, we'd like to start developing those. And we can certainly schedule an additional call if it's something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later as it applies to technical assistance. The work plans, so those are all due February 1st if you're making any changes to your work plan. I would ask that you do us a favor. If your intention is to change your work plan in whatever way, please send Gary a note, an email, and say that you intend to change it. If you do not intend to change your work plan, please send Gary a note and let him know you do not intend, so he can move forward with the work he needs to do on that and get started on it before February 1st for those of you that are not going to make changes to it. And the last item that I want to talk about is success stories. Illinois WorkNet, I'm sorry, I take it back, second to last item. Success stories are on Illinois WorkNet. We have employers, participants, partners, partnerships. I would add to this regional and community success stories in order for us to better market and share this information. Now, there is a place that you can enter this information on Illinois WorkNet, and we can talk about that in one of our calls, or if you have specific questions about it, let us know, and we can address that with you if you're having any difficulties. One seed that I would like to plant is, as it applies to marketing, to employers, participants, partners, regional communities, local governments, etc. We all need to start thinking about return on investment for apprenticeship programs and what that means to you, the return on investment, because that plays a big factor in how we market these programs and expand the opportunities and sell this to employers, participants, and other partners within a region. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is the WIOA Summit, which is April 23rd and 24th. And what we're looking for in this is we're thinking about doing either one or two or possibly even three sessions on apprenticeship, something in the realm of, the apprenticeship committee and the framework of the Apprenticeship Plus, and then doing a deeper dive in session 2 on how the navigators are going to increase capacity, and then another deep dive using the intermediaries and how they're sponsoring programs and what they bring to the table. Ultimately, though, what we're looking for is if you have ideas about this, if you would like to be a presenter and highlight some of your projects and your items within your grant that you intend to deliver on, we'd like to talk to you. Shoot me or Jennifer an email and let's talk about this sooner rather than later, because the presentations are due the January 31st. And I don't mean they have to be fully fleshed out, but we have to sign up to get on the agenda as one of the presenters for the April 23rd, 24th WIOA Summit. And so we'd really like to do this, and we'd really like to talk to, all of you about some of your thoughts on this. We can do it as a group. We can approach this a lot of different ways, but please do get back to Jennifer and I, because we really would encourage and are interested in it.
Right. Can I just add one? This is John Barr. I just one thing for just context is many of you probably know, there is a team at the state and local level that is putting together the agenda and the sessions for the statewide summit. And so what is out there, and what Pat referenced, the due date of January 31st, is a call for presentations. And so what I think Pat is suggesting is that, we figure out, what's a good coordinated way of approaching this. And so you may have already seen that call for proposals, maybe you've already submitted, but, we're just thinking, maybe we figure out a way to, apprenticeship should be at the summit. That's first and foremost, and that team will make the ultimate decision as far as what is actually put in the summit. But we're definitely going to, make a good, strong case that apprenticeship should be part of the overall presentation and agendas. So, Olivia, I was just thinking that this is a good stopping point for part one. Maybe if we wouldn't mind opening up the phone lines for any comments or questions from part one.
Yeah, I'll get them open.
Great.
Do we have any questions so far at this point in the webinar?
Phone. Okay, that's better. There's a terrible noise. And then if
Hello, is everybody?
Can you still hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay. Any comments or questions from the first part? Okay. Well, hearing none, we'll just we'll keep rolling then to the next.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I was muted. Going back to work plans, you mentioned updates by February 1st. If we wanted some feedback, reach out to Gary as soon as possible to get the feedback and then get those updates in by February 1st. And even if we are not making changes, we still need to let them know by that deadline.
Yeah, here's what I was asking. Changes to your work plan are due by February 1st. If you don't intend to make changes to your work plan, if you could just let him know that for your grant, you don't intend to make changes to your work plan so he can move forward as it relates to your grant on the activities that are occurring behind the scenes and from Gary's perspective. If you do intend to make changes, and maybe you won't have them done till February 1st, just let him know or submit it as soon as you can. But let him know that you are going to make changes, and that will let him know how to proceed with your particular grant as well.
Got it. Okay.
Great. Anyone else?
All right. Well, maybe we'll close the phones and then move to part two, which hopefully you all have had your coffee, because I'm going to go through some pretty dry stuff here as far as the grant agreements. And so again, I just want to point out that most, I know of you have already executed your agreements, which is great. All of these topics are included in the actual grant agreement, and what I'm saying now, doesn't supersede what's in the grant itself. But I do want to take a couple of minutes and highlight some of the, important provisions that I know most of you are aware of, given that you are, current grantees or have some experience with the department or the state with grants. But again, the highlighted areas here are just, I've got some slides on is just for points of reference and really some common questions that we've received in the past. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll start with some information about allowable costs. And again, these are just some, some very straightforward things. It goes obviously to the uniform administrative guidelines and the regulations that we have at the federal and the state level, that grant expenditures need to be made in accordance with generally accepted sound business practices, that you're following all of the federal regulations, that your costs are allowable and your costs are being allocated correctly to the projects that you're working on, because again, I know that many of the projects are leveraging other funding sources as well. Again, these are just some very common reminders. I'm not going to go through each one of those, but please, as you work with your program administrators, please do keep all of these items in mind. Obviously, grant funds must be, spent within the term of the agreement, and any balance at the end will have to be refunded. We go on to the next slide. Continuing on with allowable costs. Again, these are some very common questions, right? So again, I just point you to those caution notes in the middle, right? Unnecessary costs are prohibited. No food, alcohol, or entertainment. No gifts or donations. Promotional materials. Again, there's that difference between you are providing outreach versus you are promoting an agency, right? So if you are doing outreach for a program and initiative, that's allowable, but promotional materials for you or your entity is not allowed. Obviously, fines, penalties, uniforms and tools for those intermediaries that are running projects are allowable, as well as field trips for registered. So if it's within the scope of services for individuals, those types of activities, supportive services, those are allowable, but they have to be tied back to the participants. And again, just for costs that you're leveraging, just make sure that your folks are accounting for those properly, and that you're not double dipping our grant funds for other activities. Next slide, please. Next, again, allowable costs. Again, this has to do with some of your subcontractors. Make sure that your procurement is in order and that you're following your own procurement procedures, including an arm's length bargaining, and that the compensation that you're paying for folks is reasonable and necessary and meets the requirement. I do know that on some of the projects, they were bumping up to a cap. So the Department of Labor actually has a cap on the amount of funds that we're allowed to pay for consultants on a daily basis. And so we've had discussions with those projects, but know that within the scope within the grant agreement, that provision is clearly stated within the grant terms, that limit. So if anyone has a question on that, please contact me directly on those cost limit for consultants or subcontractors. Next slide, please. So again, travel expenses, should be made in accordance with the travel regulations. And again, I mentioned kind of the allocation of costs. It shouldn't just be made on kind of a blind blind percentage of an individual salary. It should be made on a basis of the actual work to the project. Next slide, please. Some of the key articles, again, this goes back to the grant agreement. I refer back, for specific guidance. All these grants will be monitored, formally monitored. We will provide both programmatic monitoring and fiscal monitoring. And Chuck Dooley is our lead monitoring manager there. We'll also be providing some on-site programmatic technical assistance, and Patrick and Jennifer will be leading that effort with the assistance of some staff we anticipate. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go down the line. But typically, our calendar for monitoring is within the second to third quarter of a grant. Technical assistance is actually within the first or second quarter. So know that we do expect things to start rolling, and the idea here is, especially with the technical assistance, is again, we are not in the gotcha game. We want every one of these projects to be successful, and the goal here is to make sure that we address any compliance or procedural issues right at the outset.
And I just want to add to that from my perspective and Jennifer and Gary's, you don't have to wait for these meetings. If there's a technical assistance issue, let's get it addressed. It's not going to be a monitoring issue, as long as we can address it early and you know, nip it in the bud and get you moving in the right direction. So, you know, we are more than happy to give you individualized attention. It doesn't have to be in these group settings. So reach out to us. Reach out to Gary first, and and Jennifer and I will pick it up from there.
Great. Next slide, please. Okay, and so obviously there is the audit requirements. I'd refer to Article 15 as far as your audit requirements. That this is an area that the department and the state has had an increased emphasis on, and the audit reports are due basically no later than 9 months after the audit period, or 30 calendar days after the receipt of the audit report, whichever one is first. And that is part of your quote unquote report deliverables that the state expects. The issue with not having that up to date is that you could potentially be you could fall into non-compliant standpoint, which could hold up grant processing and the reimbursement of funds. Next slide, please. Subcontracts, again, within the grant agreement, there is a provision that says, if you are subcontracting, or so if you've got contracts, or if you have subrecipient agreements, right, you have to obtain written approval from the department, and that can be handled over email, working with Gary Eichen, and approved through Pat Campbell. The important thing is that all of your subrecipients are subject to all the provisions that are included, including all of the the WIOA participant requirements, and all the eligibility, all the performance, all the things that go with the overall delivery of programs and services to an individual. Those terms and conditions are expected to be included in any of those subrecipient agreements. Now, if you have a contract, let's say, and that is for just kind of quote unquote typical contract, where it's, let's say, for contract for IT support for your organization, that's a straight up contract. That's not a subrecipient agreement, and that wouldn't need to have all those additional terms. So there is a distinction there. So if you have a question on that and what needs to be included in those agreements, you can definitely connect directly with Gary, and he can connect me with you or with Chuck Dooley to make sure that we're squared away there. Next slide, please. Conflict of interest. Again, you all, as part of your agreement, submitted a conflict of interest and disclosures form, and just to highlight that this is an important issue with the state, and the expectation is that you will continue to keep that up to date. So if a conflict or an apparent conflict of interest arises as part of the operation of your grant, you are required to notify the state immediately of that concern. Those requirements are listed here again. And you must have those safeguards to prohibit a conflict. And then obviously, if a conflict does arise, to notify us immediately. Next slide, please. Confidential information. This is there's a number of places within the grant agreement that this is identified, but as you all know, the security of information is an increasingly important issue, and I would just point out that there is formal guidance from the U.S. Department of Labor in the Training Employment Guidance Letter 39-11 that specifically outlines our responsibilities with the federal workforce funds around keeping personal information secure. So again, point you to your systems folks to make sure that your stuff is secure, especially as intermediaries that are operating projects that are serving individuals. Gone are the days where we should see spreadsheets with, individuals' information and even partial Social Security numbers. Next slide, please. Participant reporting requirements. I think most of you are aware that, for intermediary projects that are serving individuals, either as adults or dislocated workers, that will be using our Illinois Workforce Development System. For those of you who have intermediary projects, we will ask to identify staff that will be associated with this grant. For those organizations that may not have IWDS IDs, right? I ask that you please contact Gary Eichen after this webinar so that we can connect you with Jim Pott so we can get the correct training and make sure that we have all of that information within your grant file so that we know that kind of all of our ducks in a row are in a row as it relates to the specific case management of your projects that are serving individuals. Grants that are providing service as incumbent worker, we have a separate system that is through, actually it's on the platform of Illinois WorkNet, and it's called the Incumbent Worker Tracking System. And there's additional training modules for that system. And again, if you need access to that system, please let Gary Eichen know, and then we'll get you set up. And I should also mention that there are also additional training modules for IWDS, but we need to know specifically what your organization's systems, quote unquote, training needs are, because I know that based on our pool of grantees that we've got a lot of folks that have this in-house, and we did not set up separate trainings on these issues because of the diversity of our grantee pool here. But it is important, if you do not have this piece in-house and you are serving individuals that are either going to go into the WIOA participant pool or are going to be incumbent workers, that you get with us ASAP so we can make sure that you are set up at the outset of this.
And anyone that's not familiar with this, I would say this would be an opportunity, for us to contact us, and we can arrange something where someone can talk to you about these two systems, either as a group, multiple grantees that have all expressed interest in learning more about this, wanting to know what the big picture is, so they can better navigate these systems. We can certainly assist with getting that set up for you.
Great. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this actually concluded the part 2 of the presentation. So we got about a half hour to go through the quarterly report, and I know that that is greatly condensing that. And so I would say, and then make this offer to you, that all this information is extremely important. This quarterly reporting that Gary's going to go through is essential information. I recognize that there are many of you on the call that are well aware of how to complete the quarterly reports. And so, Patrick, if you're all right, I would say if you know this and you have in-house expertise on the quarterly reporting, I would think you're okay to release from the call. But if you do not and you want a refresher, absolutely, please stay on the line. But before we do that, Olivia, I was thinking maybe we open up the phones for another round of questions before we get into the final technical piece.
Sure thing. I'll start unmuting everybody.
Great.
Feel free to ask any questions you may have.
I've lulled you all to sleep, right? All right, going once, twice.
You're on, Gary.
All right, Gary. So we'll go ahead. We'll start this last part of this. And again, if you have expertise in your shop around quarterly reporting, feel free to drop off. If not, please definitely stick on. And Gary, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. So I've got about 37 or so slides to get through here in the next 30 minutes, so I'm probably going to move fast. We'll unmute the phones at the end, but there's also the chat pod up there, so you can throw some questions out there that way, and we'll try to address them maybe as we move along as well. Before the meeting this morning, just before 10 o'clock, I sent out an email for those of you whose email addresses I had. And just to kind of go over that really quick, the reporting, this presentation is in there. Sent you the periodic performance report and a cover sheet that goes with that, which is the PPR support cover sheet, and the periodic financial report. And also included with that is the PFR trial balance cover. Now, through the rest of the presentation, instead of spitting out the words that I evidently have a hard time saying, periodic performance report, I'm just going to be referring to that as the PPR. And the same thing with the periodic financial report is the PFR. And as we move forward through the grants and stuff, that's going to be the terminology that we'll be using all the time. I also sent along, and I hope that people haven't been dropping off, because I'm going to deviate slightly and stuff from the reporting process to add a couple of things that I'd like to have come along with the reports. And one of those is a grant quarterly work plan progress report template that I put along on the email I sent out this morning. And I also have an attachment on there, which is a quarterly report naming convention document, which has how we would like the documents to be saved when you finish completing them and before you send them in to me to meet your requirements for sending in the quarterly reports. There are also two other attachments on there that I want to cover right now very quickly. There was an external RACF ID request form. I think I have everybody, but if not, this form is what gets you an MHD ID for our grantee reporting system, which is GRS, which is the financial reporting system where you will report costs and where you will voucher for the costs so that you get payment. And if you haven't got this, you're not going to be able to get into GRS. If your organization already has one, great. You don't need one for this grant. Only one should be for each organization. And if you don't, then you need to complete this and get this form back to me as soon as you can. I've also had some other comments about authorized designee form, which is another attachment I had on there. Most of these are set up right now as one person having signature authority. If you have others, another person or two that you want to have the signature authority, this is the form you would complete with who those folks are, signing and giving them that authority, and then I will make sure that they have that authority in our grant system here. And the last thing I attached was a GRS user's manual, and that is what will walk you through the fiscal process of reporting costs and vouchering in the system to get payments for costs that you have already incurred. Okay, so that was that. To start out, I'm going to make some general observations, but the next 6 slides, basically, I'm going to breeze through rather quickly and probably just highlight a few of the items that we need to, because I want to get into the sections on the periodic performance report and periodic financial report, because that is really the crux of what we're trying to talk about and make sure everybody understands this morning. Next slide, please. Okay, these reports were developed by a multi-agency group. It's the GATA work groups. All agencies have to do this, so no matter who you have a grant from, the process should be the same for every agency that you do this, so that everybody's doing it the same, which should make things a little easier on the grantees, because they don't have to try to do something for each agency or organization they have a grant with, and everybody's got the same thing. And it's the same thing with me working with you. It's nothing new. We're all on the same page, trying to work with those same documents from grant to grant. Next slide, please. Okay, so the components of these reports really cannot be changed. They are as they are, and we can't edit them. We just complete the information as it is in the reports. We can require some additional information, supporting documentation, and that is one of the things that kind of goes away from this presentation a little bit that I have included on the email I sent out this morning, and that I would like to ask you guys to submit with your reports whenever you do submit those. Next slide, please. Okay, the reports are also available. Besides my sending them out, you can use those, or if you want to, there's a website here that tells you where you can go get it. It is an Adobe Reader form, and if you don't have Adobe Reader, you can go to the site that's on this page and download that for free onto your computer, so that you don't have any difficulty using these forms. These forms are in a writable PDF format so that you can enter information into specific areas but not be able to change anything in the other areas. And one of the biggest things when you complete these forms and you name them according to the naming conventions that the one document in the email I sent out this morning, please just do a save or a save as, but do not do a save as a PDF, because then you've made it a PDF and I'm unable then to enter anything into it as far as our approval and my name and stuff like that. So please be sure not to save it as a PDF form. Just save it as it is in the format that it is. And I really will appreciate that. Next slide, please.
Gary, we had a question. Dolores asked if we could show the illustrations on screen.
The reports and stuff? Sure.
Dolores, is that what you're referring to? Dolores, I've unmuted you. So what illustrations are you wanting to see?
No, it was before when he was doing the reporting.
Dolores, go ahead and mute your computer speaker while you're talking. It's causing a feedback loop. If you're also called in, that might be it too.
Yeah, I'll type it.
Okay. She's going to type that in for us, and then we can see what she's specifically referring to.
Okay, I mean, if you can split the screen somehow or something to put those up, Olivia, that's fine with me. Then everybody can be looking at the reports. I guess another thing Olivia put up in the chat room and stuff for anybody that might be in on this webinar right now that wasn't part of that email I sent out this morning that I named all those documents in. If you want those, just send me an email telling me what you want, and I'll get you on our list of addresses, and I'll send those out to you. So there may be people out there that weren't included in that email. So I'll be glad to provide that stuff after the workshop today, this webinar. Okay, let's back up to... Okay, while you're working on getting those up there, I'll move ahead to the next slide, please.
And Dolores just responded back. She got the email. She opened them up in the email and was following along. So she said she's good now.
Okay, great. Okay, so basically this is kind of covering the fact that, you know, as I stated earlier, that these reports are the same for every grant you should have, whether it's from our agency or another agency in the state. So these will be collected for all reports. These quarterly progress reports are a requirement and must be submitted to the agency. And then on this page, you have the website for where you can go get the PPR, the Periodic Performance Report, and the Periodic Financial Reports. You can get those from there. The PPR support cover and the PFR trial balance cover sheets are materials we developed here. That isn't out on the website you see on this page. That would have to be requested from me. And one of the reasons I included it in the email earlier this morning for everyone. Next slide, please. And there was another comment on there and stuff. In completing the information on these reports, some of the information, if you don't understand which it is, I can either help you by telling you what to put into the various spaces or complete that for you. But I'd rather you try it yourself. I've got a lot of grantees, and so I'll be sending you, or you'll have blank reports to start with, but I'll be glad to help you out with them. Email me, give me a call on any of this stuff. Okay, next. Excuse me. This presentation had a lot of other names in here for the various programs, but since we're only talking about the apprenticeship expansion grants today, this is just some of the information that actually will go into the quarterly reports. The CSFA number, it doesn't mean a lot to you guys, but that will be one of the numbers that's required in the report, and so isn't the CFDA number on this one. So I'll kind of get that in a little bit more detail later in the presentation. Next slide, please. All right, we're going to move on into then next slide for the periodic performance report and talk about a little bit more of the specifics of what the deliverables are, what performance measures are, what kind of supporting documentation we're going to need with this, and the certification by the grantee as well as myself. And that's the portion why it can't be saved as a PDF, because then I won't be able to do the agency acceptance and stuff. So we'll run through those in this report right now. Next slide, please. Each report is started out with both the PPR and the PFR reports start out with 1 to 4 pages of instructions. They're not super detailed. They're just high-level instructions on how to complete the report. So if you just read through those before you complete the report, it'll help you through the process of completing the report to send in. The domestic, the CDF or CSFA and the CFDA numbers and stuff were on the slide previously. Those will be in there. We have a listing chart that's in this presentation here just a little bit further on. These reports will come in quarterly, and at the end of the grant, you will have to submit a final report, and there is actually in section 11 of your report, it says final, and you have a yes or a no, so you would mark yes. But you will not mark this on your reports until it is the final report of the grant. One of the places that you can find the information on when these reports are due is in your grant agreement, and it states what reports are due for what reporting period, and then when the due date of that report is. Next slide, please. Okay, one of the things on these forms, when you get down to section 14, on the periodic, we'll start with this, we're talking about the periodic performance report right now, the PPR. We have to track data for the grants if you are training participants. If you're tracking participants and stuff, you will do that kind of stuff in our IWDS system that John talked about a little bit earlier, and you will also be tracking incumbent workers in our incumbent worker training or tracking system, IWTS. So those reports. So, and the fiscal stuff will be done in our GRS system. So when you get down to the deliverables and the performance measures, which are 14 through 17 on the deliverables and 18 through 21 on the performance measures, there are a couple of changes that I'd like for you to make. On number 14, in the boxes, it says file name or data source. This is where you would say that CIWDS or say CIWTS, depending on which reporting system you're using to report the participants and the other data on these reports. And then you would just skip to section 23 on this report to fill it out. You're not going to complete sections 14 through 21 because I'm going to ask you to submit to me the grant reporting template that I attached to my email this morning. And on 14, I would say just type in see attached. And the same thing with number 18, say see attached. And then you don't have to complete 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, and 21. And I'm going to ask you to attach the grantee reporting document which I put a template out on the email I sent you this morning. And basically, it follows the work plan that Patrick and John have been talking about that you guys are working on to submit. And it follows that, and you can just add rows to that document and then report each time on that, specific to each of the items in your work plan. And if you put the date to start with on that form, and then provide any information that you can as far as the progress you've made towards that one activity, and then this could be a report that would move on the next time you would put in the ending date of the reporting period, and this one same document would be used throughout the process and be attached to the progress report. So that'll help me a lot if we do that, and then you won't have to complete anything on this form in section 14 and section 18.
We do have a question. Is it safe to say navigators will not use the database and therefore not complete these sections?
Yeah, because they're not going to be doing any training or for IWDS. They will be using GRS, but that'll be more when I get into the PFR report. So that's why it will make it that much more important for the navigators to use the grantee reporting form template that I attached to the email, so that they can describe and talk about the activities in the grant and the progress they're making each quarter on that. So that will take care of their reporting basically under the deliverables and the performance measures. So you can just, instead of putting the data source name like CIWDS and stuff like that, you can just put in there C attached report. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, next slide, please. And we got to there just in time. So instead of asking on some of the items you're going to put not act, NA in, but as long as you just state that you're using a different report, either IWDS or IWTS, or and all navigators and intermediaries, I would like to use the grant reporting form template that I sent along in the email. Everybody's to use that, but some people, like the intermediaries, are going to actually be reporting in IWDS and stuff as well. So basically on the PPR report, you're going to complete sections 1 through 13, and you won't have to do anything else until you drop down to section 23 and check one of the boxes as far as whether things are expected or for kind of behind on reporting. Have the person with the signature authority for the grant enter their name, phone number, and their email address, and you'll have completed the periodic performance report. And then there's an attachment, the PPR report cover sheet. You will complete that and then attach the reporting document template that I put in the email. I'm trying to find the name of that. Okay, the quarterly work plan progress report. Attach that to the periodic support cover sheet and make that all one PDF document, so that when you submit your reports, you'll be providing me one document, which will be the periodic performance report, and then the other will be the PPR support cover with the periodic grant quarterly work plan progress report template attached to it. And if anybody has any questions or needs some help developing that at a later time, I will be glad to work with you on that reporting form. Okay, next slide, please. This is just kind of to give people an idea when we talk about deliverables, or if we talk about performance measures, what we're referring to. Basically, the deliverables are a lot of the things that are discussing activities in the grant, what your activities are, far as conducting workshops, whether you're hiring staff, whether you are doing those kinds of activities. Performance measures are more specific. It's the number of people trained. It's the it'd be the number of new apprenticeship programs that were developed, that type of information. It's a little bit more specific. Next slide, please. Okay, this is kind of moving into what I've already discussed, that the deliverables are supposed to be identified in Section 14 of the PPR report. And basically what they want you to do is to match the Unified Grant Agreement, which is the agreement that everybody signed. And that has the scope of work inside that agreement, and that scope of work would be what this slide is talking about. But more so for the UGA, instead of using that as the things that you're going to match, since we're using the work plan as identifying the activities and things that you're going to be conducting throughout the process of implementation of your grant, that instead of saying it must match the UGA, I would like for it to match the grant reporting template that I sent along in the email this morning. Okay. And basically, then in that grant reporting document, the template, you're just going to try to provide brief but enough information that I understand and can see what you've been doing over the last quarter, and how we're working towards meeting your deliverables and reporting requirements. And the grantees can add rows as they want to, but you won't have to worry about that in the form because you're using the reporting template that I've sent along instead of actually trying to do this reporting in number 14 of the PPR. Next, please. And this is kind of the same thing I've already talked about. This is getting into section 18 and 19 and 21. You won't be completing these. This is where you're going to say see attached report, because it's either going to be referring to the IWDS system or the IWTS system, and then the grantee reporting form template that I attached to the email that I sent out this morning. So we can move on from this one. Next slide, please. So some of the things that you have to address, section 22, you have to add whether or not, mark whether or not you're meeting all of your accomplishments and you're on schedule. And if you are not, to check the other box. If that is the box you end up checking, then the explanation, I would like to see that not in this section, but on the grantee reporting form template that I attached in this morning's email. Next, please. And this is the same thing for section 23. You must check one of these two boxes. If you send it in without one of these boxes checked, I will have to send it back to you as incomplete and have you send it back to me again. So next slide, please. This is getting back into the fact that if you are an intermediary and you are going to be having participants, say in IWDS, if you're dealing with dislocated workers or adults, you have to submit additional information with your reports. There is a report in IWDS that is one of the things that you'll have to send along with this, and I think that's on the next slide. But at the bottom, I have an example of what the reports should be named and how you are to save them when you send the reports into me. So for like a standard quarterly reporting report for like the PPR, you would put the grant space and then PPR, and then you would put the date. In this example on this page, it's for the support page. But for the PPR report itself, you would just leave the word support out and put 12/31/17. The date on these that you're supposed to use is the ending date of the period, not when you're submitting them, but the ending date of the reporting period, which is going to be the calendar date for the end of the quarter. Next slide. Okay, documentation. Oops, back up one, please. Okay, documentation that needs to come along with the reports, especially if you're an intermediary. If you are reporting people in IWDS on this system or in IWTS, you've got to print off a report from these systems that provide the numbers of people that you have enrolled in training. People that you have, it will also identify who's been training, whether they completed successfully or not. And that report in the IWDS system is a plan versus actual report. And this also has to be printed off and attached to the PPR support document that goes along with the PPR report. Okay, and this has to come along with all of the grantees and all of the reports that you submit. Even if you don't have anybody served yet, you're either going to have to submit a report that has 0 people on it or make a statement that no one has been enrolled yet or something like that, so we know that you didn't just forget to submit the report. Next slide, please. I've got a big thing on my screen here. Is everybody seeing that? The Zoom, is everybody's presentation still working? Okay. If there's poor performance or late deliverables or anything like that for your reports, we'd just like to encourage some discussion on that, and so that we understand what's going on. And the same way with receiving good news, we'd like to have that information so that we can use it in the process of your reporting. Next slide, please. Data elements 24 through 26 and 27 I've already referred to a little bit, as far as has to be completed on the report with the person that whose name will have to be the authorized signature, and or their designees, which is one of the forms that I talked about right at the beginning of this process. At the bottom, it's got the naming process. So if your grant number is 1661003, and then you would put PPR and then the date of the end of the reporting period, not when the report is due, but the end of the reporting period. And the final report would be basically the same thing, only you're going to put an F PPR when you get around to the final report, which will be a little bit down the road, and we can remind you how to do that a little bit later. Next slide, please. Some of the things that we usually have a few issues with that cause us to have to send the report back to have you fix some things is usually the end date of the grant isn't usually listed or isn't listed correctly. And some of the, well, we're on the PPR. Nothing should be checked in box 22. Sometimes the deliverables list as a dot point in Exhibit A for the listed on number 14. But I think we created some of the things like the reporting document and things to address some of these issues. So as we go forward, we'll deal with these issues. Next slide, please. Okay. Anybody have any quick questions about the PPR report before we move on with the financial report? Either in the chat room or
you are unmuted.
Okay, we're unmuted. If anybody has any questions quickly. Okay, well, we'll move forward into the periodic report for financial stuff, the PFR report. Okay, this report is set up a lot like the PPR report, only it's going to deal with financials. And this is another report that has to be provide it on a quarterly basis. It has instructions on the first couple of 3 pages as well on how to complete the report. For the report, what we're going to do is work with costs from your grantee reporting system, which is GRS, and we're going to use GRS information to fill out most of this report, but not all of it. So the requirements for this report is definitely one of the things you have to do is report in the grant GRS system. I also attached a GRS user's manual to the email I sent out this morning, which will walk you through the reporting system on how you use GRS. And that's why I also sent that one form, the RAC ID form, in case you need to get an MHD number so you can access GRS. That's a must, and if you haven't got that, we need to do that. Complete this report as soon as possible and send it back to me. All right, next slide, please. Okay, this form basically will support the cost you're going to report in GRS. And one of the biggest attachments, and I have a cover sheet attached to this morning's email. It's called the PFR cover sheet in the trial balance cover sheet. Attached to that will be a trial balance. Everybody has to submit a trial balance as part of the PFR report for their grant. The trial balance should be a report that is generated directly from your accounting system and not a spreadsheet created in Excel or some other type of document. It must be a report that shows you costs and expenditures and income that you've made from this grant, and it must come from your accounting system. I can't stress that enough, that's where that report has to come through. Next slide, please. Okay, this is basically some of the content. This is what we'll go through while we talk about the PFR. Next, please. So it's the same thing as far as the beginning of the report, entering your grantee name, grant number, the CSFA and the CFDA numbers, which are going to be in a slide coming up here in just a bit. They're also found in your Unified Grant Agreement. You'll have to definitely enter your FEEN, your DUNS, and the program name, and when the date was prepared. So basically, this report will be completed parts A through W are the parts that you have to complete on this. This one's the same thing. It's got a spot on there for identifying whether it is or it is not the final report. And the only time you will ever check that yes is for the last one at the end of this thing. Next slide, please. Okay, so for indirect cost rates and stuff, which is one of the things that we've had to deal with that's new under GATA and everything, and it has to match what the GATA grantee portal has in it. These are some of the things that we've already all worked through as far as dealing with figuring out cost rate percentages and what costs there are that are eligible for indirect rates. So this is something that we've already worked with and just trying to get the grant together. Next slide, please. So in section P, you just need to identify whether or not there are program restrictions and that they will be monitored, and the answer to that is going to be yes. You're going to type in the type of reference requirements for Article 41 in the budget and for the list of restrictions, and there shouldn't be any restrictions that I'm aware of that anybody's really going to need to add to this section. So Q is probably not something that you will end up completing. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll move on. Next slide, please. Okay, it says in this slide that you should complete sections T through W, and those sections are fine, and they're pretty self-explanatory as far as program income, and these are things that are going to be supported by the GRS system and the trial balance that you're going to submit. One of the things that you will also submit along with the PFR and the trial balance is a screenshot of GRS screen 371, and basically the GRS and your trial balance are supposed to match, and by match, you know, should end up with exact same dollars, but if they do not, that's fine too, as long as you provide an explanation as to why they don't balance together. So basically, if you're saying costs for this quarter were this, and then your trial balance has, if GRS says it's a certain amount and your trial balance has a different amount, then you have to explain to us why those amounts don't match, and we can move forward too if that explanation is acceptable. Next slide, please. So when we get down to components X in the PFR, right below that, you're going to type CGRS, and then you're not going to have to type anything any further in this report. So X through VB is left blank, okay? The trial balance and the documents from GRS are what are going to be used instead of completing this section on the periodic financial report. Next slide, please. So here's the documentation you need to send with it. With the PFR report, you're going to do the screenshots for 362 and for 371, and those have to be part of the attached to the supporting trial balance supporting documentation sheet. Those have to come along with your report. A bridge document needs to be provided if you don't have an individual account for this grant, where it's very easy for us to see, you know, costs in and expenditures out. If this is part of your overall budget, say for your organization, and you have to send us that, which has costs for everything else, then you have to send us some kind of a bridge document that identifies and helps us understand and identify which numbers and which amounts throughout that entire budget it is that makes up your trial balance and for the cost of this grant. So that will need to be sent along as well. These documents that you're sending along that are attached to the PFR support documentation, the trial balance stuff, should be submitted to us as a PDF document. And at the bottom are some more things as far as naming conventions. Next slide, please. Okay, I've kind of covered all of this. The very last part of the report is for you to type in the name of the person who is the authorized signature and date it, and then again save this report as a normal save without saving it as a PDF, because I will have to type my name and stuff and be able to do that on JJ of this report. Next slide, please. Okay, so basically, a lot of times we have problems with people following the naming conventions and identifying some of the other things, or they forget to send along the 371 screen and some of that stuff. And the same way with just typing in CGRS instead of leaving things blank back in, I think it was box X or something like that on the report. Can you put up the naming conventions sheet, please, Olivia? Okay, I sent this in the email. Please pin this up to your board or wherever you want to put this so that you have this available before you send in your reports, because these are how everything that you're going to submit should be named. If it's not named this way, I will send it back and ask you to please try over one more time. All right, back to the slide presentation. Thank you, Olivia. And next slide. I think we're about there. I know I'm going over. This is a little bit about the year-end financial reports. It's not yet developed, but eventually that'll be something that we're going to have to be working with, and when that comes along and everything, we will let you know. Is there another slide? Or I think maybe I'm all the way through it. That's what I thought. I guess we want to open it up for any questions at this point in time. I know we're running long, but we can open it up for a little bit, Olivia.
You are unmuted.
Anybody have any questions about the documents, what's to be completed, or anything on the reporting?
I don't have anything in the chat pod, Gary.
Yeah, I see that too. So
I do have somebody. Yes, this session was recorded, and I will be sending this recording to Gary to give out to all of you guys once we have it downloaded.
Great.
And I think, have we mentioned that this is being recorded and it'll eventually be up on WorkNet, and so they can go out and review and look at this at another time if you wish it at a later date. And if we haven't lost everybody to lunch already, that gets through. I know one of the things I want to mention real quick is that with the new grantees and everything, and this is the first time you're going through these reports, I'm glad to help you. Give me a call, or when they come in, if things aren't quite right, I'll work with you. It's no big deal, and we'll get everything as it needs to be and move forward. So I'm here to help. Give me a call. And that's it, John.
Great. Well, thank you, Gary. And so I think if there aren't any final questions or comments, we'll maybe do one last call for those. Okay. Hearing none, I'll thank you all on behalf of Pat Campbell and the group here at DCEO. Appreciate your continued work and look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.